Welcome everyone to our WILF Congress. We have 2 full days ahead of us today, Saturday, and tomorrow. We are going to be starting out with Nancy Price, who is going to be introducing the rest of our program. And Nancy, are you ready? You aren't quite on camera.
There, I should be on camera. Thank you very much. Yes, so good morning, everybody, to this very important panel on securing the right to vote and have your vote counted. As we all hear the news and get emails and discuss among ourselves, we really understand clearly, I think, that alarmed by the historic voter turnout and unprecedented vote by mail in 2020, most Republican state legislatures continue to pass bills that increase voter discrimination, disenfranchisement, and voter confusion. In addition, and Barbara Arnwine, president and founder of the Transnational Justice Institute, will be discussing this part of our panel considerations. Secondly, as we all know, we're faced with what do we really know about the guaranteed right to vote? Jan BenDor of the Michigan Election Reform Alliance will discuss her work on how we must mobilize to do now in our states before time runs out to secure the right to vote and have our vote counted. We really have to pay attention to these crucial issues of democracy so that we can go into the 2022 and 2024 election season with some clear understanding of how to mobilize and how to secure these rights. Otherwise, these 2 upcoming elections will be very problematic, controversial, and contended. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce Barbara Arwine, president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition. She has spent many decades on many issues of civil rights, voting rights. She's nationally and internationally recognized for also her interest in housing and lending, women's rights, especially the issues affecting intersectionality and African-American women and girls, community development, employment issues, education, policing restructuring, and environmental justice. As you see, she's a woman with many commitments to improve economic and social justice. So Barbara, I'd just like to turn this over to you now to continue this discussion and let us know what you're doing. It's so important.
Well, I want to, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I want to thank everybody who has taken their Saturday morning to join us to talk about this entirety of this current moment in our fight for the right to vote. I teach law and I teach civil rights law and voting rights law at Columbia respectively and at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, for their law schools. And I also work very closely with the African American Policy Forum. And there's just so much to be said about the moment that we're in. First of all, I want to recognize that today is a historic day. This is the 2nd anniversary of the release of the 1619 Project, which has caused so much controversy in our nation and consternation because of it's telling the truth about the effect of slavery, not only on the past, but how it inculcates itself into current day institutions. And so I am so grateful to Hannah Jones and to all the people at the New York Times who published that report 2 years ago, and for its amazing impact. and truth-telling. But at the same time, it's led to this entire assault on critical race theories, women's studies, by the way. A lot of people get this twisted. They think this is only, these states are only banning, quote, critical race theory. They're banning women's studies in a lot of these states.
Yeah.
And not to mention that they're also banning ethnic and studies around Mexican Americans, Latino fights, for justice, and not to mention LGBTQIA. So there's a lot going on, but I just had to start with that acknowledgement. I'll end talking about next week's historical bookend and about why this is such an important time in history. I want everybody to know that when I teach, I usually use a teaching circle, and I talk about how we started this nation's fight for the right to vote with vote denial, and how we ended up in the current era of massive vote denial. And so, trying to, walk people through this fight. But the fight for the right to vote has been one of expansion, right? Because we know that when the US was founded, its fundamental principles, it was founded on class, property, religion, race, and patriarchy. Those standards became the standards for the original vote. The only people allowed to vote were what? White, male, property owners. And in some of the colonies before independence, you had to be of the right religion. So people, really need to understand that our initial right to vote in the US, what is now the US colonies, were all predicated on those principles. So the racism, believing that Native Americans were heathens, and that their land was, rightfully to be taken, came, of course, out of the papal decree, the doctrine of discovery, which basically said, go forth and conquer these people, take their land, take their property, make them Christians if you can. That kind of, theory was also used, of course, to undergird and to support slavery. And what we saw it happened, because when we talk about property owners, remember, enslaved Africans were not humans in the view of the owners. They were considered initially chattel property, meaning instead of being humans, they were chattel property like cattle, like any other, owned animal to be exploited for the use of the master. That is the theory that undergirded our original voting system. Patriarchy, only men could vote. No women were initially given, that right. And of course, we could talk about, sporadic differences in history where women's rights to vote were acknowledged and then denied, etc. We could go through all of that, but the rule in general was the denial of women the right to vote, and patriarchy dominated. And, as I mentioned, class, it was very elitist, our original conception of voting. So I only raised this because sometimes the past is prologue.
Yeah,
right. And a lot of what we're looking at today is the result of those beliefs. And in fact, some of these beliefs have come full circle. If you look at Matthew Vadum's, writing and some others, what are they talking about? They're saying that the right to vote right now should be based on property owners. They're saying we need to shrink the electorate, that is too expansive, that certain people who are, quote, leeches on society because they, they get SSI or they get Social Security or they get other things, should not have the right to vote. They believe that, folks. Don't you doubt that they're just talking. And so when you hear in Georgia, when during that whole debate for SB 202 last year, when they were in, private caucus, that is the GOP, and they talked about shrinking the electorate in Georgia by getting rid of 20% of the Black vote. That's what they're talking about.
Right.
And in Arizona, the same theory came up about, about shrinking the electorate. So we got to understand, what's going on in our current history and our current moment and how it ties into this vicious history. In 2000, I had the privilege, I guess you would call it, as the head then of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, for which I still am their president emeritus. When we fought, the entirety of the case of what was then called NAACP versus Harris against Florida for its vicious voter suppression in 2000. And most people think about that era as just being about what? The unmatching, Palm County votes and ballots, but they don't realize that there was severe racial oppression where Blacks were being denied the right to vote either openly as what we call disparate treatment, where Blacks were sent to different lines and processed differently, or where as felon status was implied to Black folks who never had been arrested, all kinds of problems, but it resulted in thousands, over 90, probably 1,000 African Americans having their votes denied. In a race that was decided by hundreds. Come on, so there's so much missing in the way in which we talk about the current era. But at that point, I started saying to people, listen, we're in a new paradigm. We got to really understand that this voter suppression is real, that this is part of an ongoing strategy, and we need to do something about it. That's why we created the election protection whole format. But when Obama got elected, that really was a shock to so many people. In fact, you and I know, all of you know people who were unhinged by it. They have never been the same. It mentally distressed them out of their rationality because people did not assume that you would have an African American being elected at that period in time, and that resulted in the politics of obstruction that we see today. And that resulted in the assault on the vote, because in 2010, 25 million people who had shown up to vote in 2008 did not vote. And as a consequence, 30 state legislatures became trifectas, became effectively ruled by one party. And they decided that was going to be the future of their states, that they were going to restrict the right to vote. And I introduced in April of 2011 to the nation what was called the Map of Shame. And I talked about this new movement of voter suppression and prophesized, actually projected that if this became the dominant movement, if there wasn't federal, steps taken to stop it, that we were going to see it being decisive for an election, presidential election, or any other close elections. And remember that in 2016, we had a narrow, victory based on, some questionable practices in a whole lot of states that knocked out voters, but also, and we know that most congressional races during that period were decided by 2,000 votes or less. So there's all kinds of, importance when we talk about this era.
We may be experiencing technical difficulties.
So how do we get to where we are today? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Now
we can now.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I just got that notice about technical difficulties. But anyway, in 2020, 17 million more people voted than voted in 2016. 17 million, the largest voter turnout, by the way, in almost a decade. And people are just, astounded that this happened during the COVID era. But why did we have such an incredible turnout? That's because we used new methods of voting that made it easier and more accessible for people to vote. Vote by mail was huge in that process, but also you had 24-hour voting, you had drop boxes, you had all kinds of other systems that people had not been accustomed to. And that one thing we found out is what we always said, that if you make it easier for people to vote, more people will vote. If you make people aware that you want them to vote, they will vote. A lot of, Pew studies tell us that a lot of voters don't vote because they think nobody wants them to vote. That people think that it's hard to vote because that's the way they want it, because they want to exclude people from voting, that people are confused about how to vote, all these kind of things. So what we did, and when I say we, I mean all of us listening today, all our groups, all our organizations, we engaged in massive voter education. Somehow we did it in the midst of a pandemic. We did some of the best voter education ever done by our sector. And it had a huge impact and helped people to turn out to vote. And that turnout it continued into Georgia. I was on the ground in Georgia. I moved to Georgia in early November and stayed there until January, till the election was over in January. And I can tell you that when we first started the Georgia election cycle, people were saying, we'll be lucky if we get 10% of the vote to turn out because that's the historic turnout rate for runoff elections. And I told people, stop saying that. You're wrong. You're going to have probably 70% or more of your turnout that you had for the general elections. You're just projecting wrong, and you're going to have a massive turnout, and it's going to be very strong. And it turned out that they were wrong. And it did turn out that I was closer to what the actual turnout numbers were. Because in Georgia, what I discovered being there was the real commitment to voting, but also the youth commitment. Because if you look at the Georgia stats, you'll see young voters were really determinative, especially voters of color, young voters of color. So you'll see, that incredible impact of that pool of voters on what became the Ossoff and Warnock victories. But moving on to the current, that set off a wave of consternation because people have been fearing, as former President Trump said, that if you have this new electorate turning out and voting heavily, then it's the death of people's certain politics and certain conservative politics, because that voting wing tends to be a little bit more, quote, liberal and progressive. So as a result, in 2021, we've been dealing with this assault on the right to vote. Can we show the map? So here's a map. If we can expand it, people, you can see there, that is the current state of our fight over the right to vote in 2021. There have been you read 400 bills, well, actually, it's quite a lot more that have been introduced in over 48 states to restrict the right to vote. What does that mean? A lot of people all they want to talk about is voter ID. Honey, I wish it were only voter ID. They want to get rid of early voting. 10 states have passed laws making it easier for the state legislature to take over county boards of elections. In fact, there's a fight right now in Georgia where the Georgia state legislature is trying to take over Fulton County's Board of Elections. They made it easier to override secretaries of elections in their states. Secretaries of state, directors of elections, whoever has that authority within the states to run the electoral process, because they want to have the right to, quote, count the votes, which is vicious. We've had all these restrictions on ballot collection. States have been banning drop boxes, or saying you can only have drop boxes inside of the Board of Elections offices that close on weekends. And close at 5 o'clock. So what good are they? The theory of drop boxes is that people have the availability to use them after they get off of work and during weekends and other hours. And they've also, as you know, they've been, restricting, I mentioned, the restrictions on early voting. They've gotten rid of election day registration. They've been putting harsh requirements on different voter registration organizations, making it harder for them to participate in that process, getting rid of, there's been, attack of some of the online, processes, telling boards of elections that they cannot mail to people they know are registered voters a ballot application to vote by mail. They've been passing all of these laws, making it harder for, if you vote in the wrong precinct, even if you're voting for the mayor of a city, even if you're voting for the governor of your state, even if you're voting for Congress, for Senate, that if you're in the wrong precinct, that your ballot can't be counted. So there's all of these restrictions, and of course we all know the ugliest one, right? And that's the one that's been passed in Georgia and Florida, and Texas is getting ready to pass it, which basically says that if somebody is in a long line and they've been waiting for hours, you can't give them water or food. I mean, that's how vicious and criminally minded these folks are. So that map that you're looking at is a map showing the 18 states that have actually passed over 30 voter restriction laws. And Texas wants to rapidly become part of that number to pass even worse laws than they passed already. So I just wanted to point that out. If you can now, I just want to quickly talk about the answer to this problem.
So Barbara,
Yes.
we have the other map if you'd like to see on
Oh, yes, please, show the other map.
Okay,
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah.
This is a map that we love because we never stop fighting for voting rights. That means we always have our offense and our defense and whatever we can think of to prevail and to win. Well, this is our offense. These are the laws in the states where we have expanded the right to vote, where we're fighting to expand the right to vote. And that's important, where, people are being given, greater, rights to, vote by mail, given the rights where they've expanded early voting hours, where they've expanded drive-in, drive-through voting, where they made, all these options. And by the way, I think we totally undercount the beauty and value of drive-through voting. Because it really does drive the numbers up significantly, but very few counties and very few states use it. We also have seen an increase in online voter registration. But yeah, I know you're saying, what? Yes, there are 13 states that have no ongoing laws requiring online voter registration. That's why Texas is so vicious. That's why Alabama is so hard for people. That's why states like South Carolina and others are so difficult, because they have all these restrictions on your ability to vote, including to cast absentee ballots, vote by mail ballots. So our fight on the progressive side has been very strong, where we've been, trying to pass, more rights to vote, easier options, easier systems. The next thing is, when you hear me talk about that 400, and I talk about the 30 ugly laws that have already been passed, the good news is that there's an answer to it. It's not like we can just sit here and just go, oh my God, what you gonna ever do with Texas? Oh my goodness, what you gonna ever do with DeSantis and everybody in Florida? What you gonna do with with a Kemp in good old Georgia? What you gonna do, with these people? Well, the answer is you're gonna pass federal legislation. And if we could show the trifold.
Sure.
And then I'm gonna wrap. Yes, I'm gonna wrap. The trifold is going to show you the current bills that we're fighting for in the US Senate for us.
You're welcome.
This is a trifold that's been put together by the Transformative Justice Coalition, and it explains the three bills that are determinative and would make all the difference. But one is called S1, used to be HR, it's also HR 1 in the House technically, and that is the For the People Act. And what the For the People Act does that's amazing is that, Congress has always, under the Constitution, had the authority to regulate federal elections. That's why we all vote the first Tuesday in November. That's by congressional mandate under that authority. But that authority has been used very limitedly, very sparingly, I should say. And only have we seen it in the, in the HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, and in the National Voter Registration Act, and of course in the Civil Rights Act of 1965, where Black women finally got the right to vote, as did Native American women, Latino women, and women of color in general. But what's so beautiful about that congressional power is that they have the authority to regulate any aspect of federal elections. Well, the For the People Act takes that power into serious consideration and application, and it would mandate national standards across the board for every state for federal elections. So you would have to have 15 days of early voting. You would have to have election day voter registration. You would have to have available automatic voter registration. You would have to have available for people who are formerly incarcerated and are encountering horrific problems in Alabama, Arizona, Florida, and so many other states, some 6 million people, not to mention the confused 9 to 17 million people who are formerly incarcerated and have no idea what their rights are. What would make all those rights uniform? All of them would be restored and have the right to vote. And of course, with women becoming an increasingly huge part of that population, that becomes even more important. We also, it does, so many good things that we would love to see be uniform. So your rights in Florida, your rights in Oregon, your rights in California, they're all the same. For federal elections. That's why we need the For the People Act. And believe it or not, it also imposes non-partisan requirements for redistricting. All these states are rushing like crazy since the census data came out last week to redistrict. And let me tell you, if you saw the video that I posted on my Twitter at Barb73, you'll see that, that's a video where Florida legislators are bragging about how they're going to draw these maps to make the state redder and to guarantee that they have partisanly redistricted. So we need those standards from the we need those standards. You can get copies of the bifold at votingrightsalliance.org. That is our main voting site. I'm also having new materials put up this weekend for some other reasons I'll talk about in a minute. But also, so that's the information on the For the People Act. There's a quote, Manchin compromise being talked about, a Manchin-Warnock compromise that we'll see that also is based on the For the People Act standards of uniform mandated standards. And we know that in the quote, Manchin compromise is a national holiday for voting, the same provisions on early voting, etc. The other act is the one you've been hearing about this week, and that's the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which will impose reestablish, restore Section 5's application and coverage to 1,200 jurisdictions over 9 states that have been engaging in voter suppression historically and to this date. And one thing I tell people say, well, why do you need both acts? I say they're bookends. Imagine a shelf, and on the shelf is every right to vote. the right to vote early, the right to vote online, the right to have voter ID requirements that aren't onerous. All of those rights, if you have them on the shelf, if you don't have bookends to keep the books, what? They fall off the shelf. They get crooked. They get all out of place. The beauty of bookends. So on one bookend, you have the federally mandated standards. On the other side of the bookshelf, you have the other bookend that is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that just got introduced into Congress, into the House this week on Tuesday. And what it does is it restores the pre-clearance provisions that said before you can even institute a bad law, it has to be reviewed, or any law affecting voting, changing the standards or the procedures of voting or the practices of voting, that you must have it reviewed by the Department of Justice or by the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. to be found to be non-discriminatory. So if that were in place, that SB 202, that evil SB 90 in Florida, none of that would be law right now, because it all would have to be pre-cleared before it could be even implemented. So that's why you want it. I always tell people, I can't think criminally enough. We need Section 5 operative and that pre-clearance provision, because these people can think of some of the most wicked ways of stealing, denying, and blocking votes. With that said, I just want to end by thanking everybody. Get in this fight, be with us. We are, yes, I've been to jail a couple of times. My new name is Jailbird. That was not by design. It's by necessity, because we got to force the Senate to do its job, because it's not just doing the right thing. So we got to keep the heat, the pressure on them. And next week, come join us on the 28th August. We're sponsoring major activities around the anniversary of the March on Washington, the 58th anniversary. Thank you so much. I'm here to answer questions. Thank you.
Barbara, I think maybe we'll go to Jan. Thank you for this wonderfully dynamic and compelling presentation. I think maybe we'll go to Jan now and then have questions after, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, Jan. I would just like to very briefly to all of you introduce Jan, who is a state accredited elections administrator and elections worker trainer with a lengthy experience as a deputy township clerk. She is a founding member of the nonprofit, nonpartisan Michigan Election Reform Alliance, which advocates for voter protection, election verification, and comprehensive election security. She led the successful 2018 effort to stop gerrymandering in Michigan, passing a state constitutional amendment to establish an independent citizens redistricting commission. Welcome, Jan, and let us know what you're up to now. Your documents.
I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
And then we'll move right in.
Sure.
I just wanted to say thank you to Nancy and Barbara, who are colleagues on the board of the National Election Defense Coalition. So we are working at a national level together, even as we work locally as well. And thank you, Barbara, for talking about Georgia. I think half of Michigan was in Georgia last fall. We consider Georgia our sister state. We both have 16 electoral votes and a lot of the same social and economic problems. I have been thinking about how to improve in our elections for a very long time. I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee when I was 13 in Southern Illinois, and my field director was John Lewis. And we had a wonderful reunion some years ago when he came to Michigan to speak, at which time he apologized that he didn't have as much hair as he used to have. Well, it's such a wonderful man, and I loved him when he was in his 20s just as much. We have a lot of work to do, as Barbara has laid out. But I keep thinking, why are we still here? Didn't we already do 1963? Why are we stuck in this rat wheel of no progress? The clue to the answer came in 2007 when the GOP-dominated Michigan Senate went to the state Supreme Court and asked them to overturn a previous Attorney General opinion against photo ID, saying, well, you know, he was wrong and we want you to overrule it. The Supreme Court did take up that challenge, but one of the things they said in the arguments was very disconcerting to us. They said, you know, in Michigan, you don't really have a fundamental right to vote. And that started us thinking, and there have been other authors that have gotten thinking about this. If you look at your US Constitution, you will not find a fundamental right to vote anywhere in it. The first slide has 4 amendments to the Constitution that mention voting in some way. People usually think of the 15th Amendment as the big one. But let's look at how it's worded. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Well, what's wrong with that statement? It's in the negative. Shall not be denied. It doesn't say it's a fundamental guaranteed right. And if you look at the wording of the next 3 that we have here, we've got the 19th Amendment. That was the Suffrage Amendment. Shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. Then we go to the 24th Amendment, which had to do with you can't be denied because you didn't pay a poll tax. And finally, the 26th Amendment, which says you can't be denied if you're only 18. The problem with this, as we learned in court in Michigan, is if you don't have the right stated as a fundamental, enumerated, direct right, what happens in court? And you know what a law means is what the judges say it means. That's boil it down. If the judge looks at that and does not see a positive, fundamental, enumerated right to vote, they're not going to apply what's called strict scrutiny. And in strict scrutiny, a judge asks the government or whoever is trying to abridge and deny, what compelling reason do you have for doing this? Now, we've got the states that Barbara has listed all over the country saying we've got to do all this for protecting the purity of the vote and the honesty of the vote. But they have no proof that there's a problem, none whatsoever. And you know, the Stop the Steal people have run all over the country trying to claim there is, but they have not produced one piece of evidence. So under strict scrutiny, they would continue to be unsuccessful, and nobody would be successful in Florida or Texas or anywhere else with these nonsense laws. But without strict scrutiny, all the court has to do is look at that and say, well, it kind of sounds reasonable. You know, you can require a photo ID as long as the person doesn't have to pay for it, or as long as some other, you know, excuse for the thing. That's not going to give us a fundamental right to vote. So could you move to the next slide?
This one?
Go past all the amendments now.
Okay, I had to, yeah.
I want to get to
where it talks about the states.
Yes.
So they're on 3 slides also because
okay, the Michigan Constitution. I just want to show people Article 1 of my state's Constitution, and you will be flabbergasted by the number of sections of this Constitution, and yet there is not one mention. This is a listing of basic rights, and there is not one mention of the right to vote. Are you finding it?
No.
They were all in the same word
there were
document.
all 8 of them, and is it this one?
The Constitution of Michigan of 1963.
Oh, 63. All right, let me find it.
And that was our last one. And it's a declaration of rights, and you don't have to read the whole thing, but you see there's equal protection, there's freedom of worship.
I had it. Okay.
And when you get down to the bottom of it, Article 27, we even have the right to have embryonic stem cell research. That was passed by a very rich man who wanted to have it for himself. He had cancer. That's a wonderful list of rights. Where did voting go? It's not there. Okay, let's go to the next slide.
So I don't know. I may not have. I only had 8 pages. I don't know. So you don't want these.
This is an Excel spreadsheet of the constitutions of all 50 states.
Okay, here we go. There you go. So there's Alabama to Maine.
Yeah, and we've got 3 columns here, which you don't have time to read right now, but this is an analysis that we did. And we said, well, do they have an explicit grant of the right to vote? Do they have just some language that says elections will be free and equal? And then an implicit grant of the right to vote, which just has a bunch of Christmas tree things, you know, nothing specific about a single right to vote. But, you know, the right to get an absentee ballot would be an implicit grant, but not an explicit grant. And in Michigan here, we did add quite a few of those things, but we never added a fundamental right to vote in 2018. Some people here will be shocked that California does not have an explicit grant of the right to vote. And you know, everybody thinks California is ahead of everyone. Well, they are in a lot of ways, but not on this matter. So out of the 50 states, how many do you think have even the free and equal language? Nobody has an explicit grant of the right to vote. There are 12. And that means that we're on very shaky ground in a lot of ways, because if we're depending on the United States Congress to pass these very important Senate bills, you know, they giveth and they could taketh away. And that's the problem with relying on legislation. The Violence Against Women Act, we all thought that was going to be forever, and until it wasn't. And it's now not very assured. So if we want something to be a fundamental right, it needs to be in a constitution. And if we can't get it into the United States Constitution right away, we can get it into state constitutions. And I'm wanting you to see a slide that says Initiative and Referendum Institute. It's got a big red bar at the top.
It should be there now.
Great. This is a website. This institute is in California. And on this slide, there are 26 states in which the citizens have the right to initiate legislation, and they all also have the right to initiate amendments to their state constitution. And if your state is on this list, you have a wonderful tool for really securing the right to vote for everyone. It's the only way we're going to do it and really have it last. Along with, and I've participated in 4 different national committees working on S1 and S4, and they're very important, but there's a chance we might not get them. And even if we get them, we're not done. So moving along, I want to give just one more slide, and that is what we're working on here in Michigan to solve this problem. We are adding Section 28 to that Article 1 that had all those rights in it. And it's very simple. There are other things that we're doing to flesh this out, but the right to vote is a fundamental right that shall be promoted and encouraged by the state by taking all reasonable steps necessary to assure that every citizen residing in this state shall have the opportunity to vote in all elections. That's a fundamental right, and it cannot be degraded by claims of election security or this and that and the other thing, because anyone who makes such claims will have to show the court a compelling and proven reason for this. And none of these voter suppression tactics can be supported that way. They just won't. They'll keep trying for a while, and that's why we need pre-clearance. It's a lot easier if you don't have to go to court to stop something, if you've got pre-clearance to prevent it in the first place. And I've argued with a number of people that pre-clearance should extend to all 50 states, because every state has this tendency, and they're going to keep trying. And if we have to pre-clear all of these voting changes, it'll help. I don't know that we're going to get that this time, but at least the long histories of voter suppression will have to be pre-cleared. So that is what we're working on. We're right now putting the polishing touches on our proposal with the help of some constitutional scholars. We've got some good ones at the University of Michigan, thank goodness. One of them is a dear old friend of mine in voter protection, Barb McQuaid. Perhaps you've seen Barb on MSNBC. She's the former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. So we're really trying to make this a major effort. And if we can get it through, we will need 500,000 signatures to get it on the ballot. Been there before and done that before. In 2018, we did it, and we've done it earlier. And I'm looking forward to solving this very basic problem for our American democracy. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you so much, Jan, for this additional way that we can work at the local and state level to guarantee the right to vote, the constitutional right to vote. And I see one question here. It's been a long time since I took, this is from Beth Friedman Kirk. It's been a long time since I took constitutional law in law school, but I'm wondering why the right to vote in state and local elections is not implied to be a fundamental right under the US Constitution. Who would like to, Jan, would you like to answer that? And then Barbara.
Well, as I stated, an implied right is not very strong. It has to be enumerated and described as a fundamental right. If it's implied, then all kinds of bad things happen, and judges have way too much leeway to allow things to go on.
Yeah. Barbara.
Yes, I mean, obviously, there is obviously the implied right to vote has been interpreted, over and over to exist. But I think a whole lot of people were just shocked, when the 2000 ruling was made, in the Bush versus Gore case, and the Supreme Court said that there's no fundamental right to the right to vote for president. And people were like, what? And, we're in shock. And that they said that it's a privilege, right? And that was kind of a shock to a whole lot of people. And also, I think probably to some of the Supreme Court members who wrote Baker versus Carr and some other cases that seem to imply that right. So I agree that that this is one of the battlegrounds. The problem is that our opponents, which I call the anti-democracy forces, are also proposing constitutional amendments. And I mean, tell you, they're going the opposite way. And so we do need to, really think strategically about how we, move. I can say that I have been pleased to see the courts like Pennsylvania that have used twice now their interpretation of their state constitution to strike down voter suppression methods. Remember that they struck down the vicious voter ID law there, and they struck down the partisan redistricting and gerrymandering. Also in believe it or not, North Carolina That they had a very interesting ruling last year where they applied what they call their Declaration of Rights to strike down, a voter suppression measure. It's fascinating because, as we know, that's been rarely done in that state because it's a state that is dominated by such vicious, voter suppression efforts. But they have a huge case coming up now over felon disenfranchisement that's being litigated now in the courts, and the case of, I always tell people, if you haven't read NAACP versus McCory, that you really are behind on voting rights litigation, at least for those of us who are litigators. And, and I used the McCory case to, once again, to show that's the case that said that the North Carolina state legislature drew or designed all of their voter suppression bill, the monster bill in 2014, on the basis of their a race. That it said it did it with surgical precision, looking at how African Americans voted and then saying away with those rights, looking at how whites voted and said, let's make that stronger. Really vicious bill. And that case is fabulous because it really talks about this. And so absolutely, where you have it, where you have these rights, and that was a federal district court case, by the way, interpreting the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the 14th Amendment. But in the state level, these constitutions have been used and are being used well. Not always, because if you get some of these ugly courts like you got in Texas, but Texas doesn't have the right anyway. But if you you will have problems with the interpretation, but we got that prop period. So I just think that, again, we fight everywhere. We got to have our offense of saying we want the right to vote. It should be explicit. It should be understood. It should be enshrined. And at the same time, we got to have our offense that says we need the For the People Act. Regardless of this fundamental right to vote, you got to have uniform standards. And if you don't have uniform standards, then how in the world did you even begin to help voters? How many of you have had relatives call you from their states trying to understand something in their state law, and all you know is your state law?
Yeah.
That's how fundamentally it stops democracy. Right. When you don't have uniform standards. So instead of having 51 darn voting systems, and as some people will tell you, that's not even a good number because you got to really base it on the number of boards of elections because they all have different rules, that you have one set of understood rules that we can educate people better across the country, have an empowered voter, and educated voter is the most powerful voter.
And Barbara, thank you for mentioning the importance of who's on the court in each state. One of the campaigns that we've gone on is to get people to vote their complete ballot and vote for Supreme Court and Court of Appeals candidates, which a lot of people just, I don't know anything about this, and they skip it. And it's terribly important. At one point, Michigan was ranked by Duke Law, was ranked 49th. No, it was ranked 50th out of 52 Supreme Courts in the poor quality of the decisions and the lack of independence. And that was, of course, because 3 of the justices were from the same Republican law firm. It was terrible. It was really embarrassing. There were 52 Supreme Courts because Texas has 2. And so it really matters. We pushed and got more people to pay attention, and now we're coming up in the rankings, and we've got a pretty decent court. But it really matters who you vote for these jobs.
And not only that, if people really believe that Black Lives Matters, then you care about who you're electing for mayor, because the mayor appoints the police chief. You care about who you're electing for sheriff. That's probably the most underlooked at office. Very few women sit in those offices, by the way. And you would be looking at, who you elect for sheriff, clerk of court, huge. People think that that's, a de minimis position. It is critical. So you would be looking at, those, who's sitting in those. Prosecutor, the power of the prosecutor. Kim, look at, the power of a Rachel Rollins. Look at, Marilyn Mosby. Look at all of these progressive prosecutors who have come out there and have just changed the landscape of how we are prosecuting. And as a consequences, what's happening? As you get in these progressive prosecutors, the prison rolls are decreasing because they're saying we're not going to prosecute stupid cases, and we're not going to, prosecute status cases and nonviolent offenses and put people in jail for that. So you're seeing a huge transformation because of that ability, but it's not enough of it. People really need to vote the entire ballot, for policing reform. And let me say another movement that's totally underrepresented because we're here as women. I mean, the average state legislature only is what, 25% women? I mean, how the heck is that real in 2021? How has that happened? We have to really be more aggressive and not, and of course, some people say, well, all women aren't, women aren't for women. Yeah, but we still need to get those good women into office. How in the world do we allow the only state legislature to have any kind of equality is what, Nevada? Nevada? I mean, come on. We should be able to point to, half the darn nation and say it's 50% women governing. Yep. That's a huge mistake that we have to get more aggressive about. We're ranked, what, 75th in the world for women's representation in government?
Yeah.
No.
So I hesitate to say that we need to draw this to a close because another panel is coming on. Is that correct, Darian, that we are running toward the end here?
That is correct. It's time to wrap up. We're a few minutes over.
Yes. So
Nancy, I put a question in the chat quite a ways back, which is important.
Well, please ask it now, Teresa. I probably missed that in keeping track of things. Thank you very much.
Well, Barbara, I participated in the May 8 actions to protect our vote. And so I got that big, long banner I haven't returned yet.
You better give me my banner.
But anyway, what are the next steps for the street heat on the Protect Our Vote campaign?
Thank you. And let me tell people, if you go to, gosh, I'm trying to get the link for you. If you go to bit.ly at Good Trouble DC, .com, you're gonna find a link for a couple things for the rallies that we're doing next weekend. We're gonna of course, the 26th is the ERA day. And so we're gonna be rallying, I'm speaking, we're doing all kinds of stuff on the 26th regarding the ERA. But on the 27th, we're probably gonna go out and do some mass demonstrations. And on the 28th, we got the March on Washington, and we have the rally at the Lincoln Memorial. We're supporting the rally at the Lincoln Memorial, and we're bringing 900 people to Washington, D.C., just the TJC. And you should look for information because we got a bus coming out of Detroit, and we're paying all expenses, no dime to ride our buses, and we're putting up our people for 2 nights at a really nice hotel in DC, and we're having educational programs. We're going to talk about the history of that march, and then we're going to talk about where we go from here, how we organize, how we're stronger for 2022. So I really encourage you, and we're going to live stream it for people to watch all over the country. So I encourage you to look for more of that information. All right.
Wonderful.
Yes,
Wonderful.
votingrightsalliance.org already has some of it up, and we're going to be loading more this weekend.
And we
So,
do need to wrap
I
up
think-
right now.
Yeah,
Please.
so I just want to thank you both, Barbara and Jan, for a really compelling hour that's just going to mobilize us all the more for these next months and year. And I will send out to the list that is viewing the links and the information that you just mentioned, Barbara, so that people know. And thank you so very much. Really appreciate